A railway sold as the future of Britain now can't say when it will open. The budget has more than doubled. An entire leg to the north has been cancelled outright, and the line no longer even reaches the station it was named for. This is HS2, Britain's most expensive infrastructure project, and right now it stands as a warning to every government watching. In 2010, the pitch was simple. A high-speed line connecting London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds. Trains at up to 225 miles per hour, a Y-shaped network stitching the country together. The price tag, around £37.5 billion in 2009 prices. That number is where everything started to go wrong. Here's the first problem, and it's one that shows up in almost every failed mega project. The £37.5 billion figure was not built from detailed engineering. It was a political number set early so the business case could clear Parliament. No one had actually designed the tunnels, the bridges or the stations yet. They were pricing a railway that didn't exist on paper. This is a pattern worth understanding on its own. When a budget gets locked in before the engineering is finished, every discovery afterward can only push the number in one direction, up. And that's exactly what happened. By 2019, the estimate for the full network had climbed to around £88 billion. By May 2026, the government's own figures put the London to Birmingham section alone somewhere between £87.7 billion and £102.7 billion in 2025 prices. One phase, not the whole railway, just the first piece. So how does a single number drift that far from reality? Contracts were awarded before designs were locked. Engineers priced work, construction started, and then the scope kept changing underneath them. Independent reviews later described it as a project where the money moved faster than the decisions. It's worth sitting with that for a moment, because it's not just a British problem. Almost every mega project over $1 billion follows a version of the same curve. Researchers who study large infrastructure schemes have a name for it: optimism bias. Planners consistently underestimate cost and time, not because they're incompetent, but because the projects that get approved are the ones with the most attractive numbers. A realistic estimate rarely wins funding. An optimistic one does. HS2 wasn't an outlier. It was the pattern playing out at national scale. There's another force at work here too, one that has nothing to do with engineering. HS2 has now been managed across 5 different prime ministers and multiple changes of transport secretary, each arriving with their own priorities and their own appetite for risk. A project this size takes longer to build than most governments last in office. That mismatch matters more than it sounds. Every new administration inherits a plan it didn't design, under pressure to either defend it publicly or distance itself from its failures. Decisions that should be purely technical, how to phase construction, when to lock a design, become entangled with electoral timing instead. A railway needs continuity across decades. British politics rarely offers that. Watch what happens next, because this is where ambition starts turning into retreat. In October 2023, the government cancelled the entire northern leg. The Birmingham to Manchester section, gone. The line that was supposed to unite the country's industrial north with London was cut down to a single connection between 2 cities in the middle of England. The UK's own Public Accounts Committee called it a watershed moment, a public admission that the original vision was no longer affordable. Then came Euston. The London terminus, the symbolic endpoint of the entire project, was quietly pushed off the initial route. For a period, HS2 trains were not guaranteed to reach central London at all. A railway built to save time now risked ending several miles short of its own name. Notice the psychology here. Each cut was framed as a responsible cost-saving decision, but stacked together, they tell a different story. This wasn't a railway being refined. It was a railway being dismantled in public, one headline at a time. By June 2025, the Transport Secretary confirmed what many had already assumed. The original 2033 opening date was gone. No new date was given at the time. Later guidance pointed to first trains between Old Oak Common and Birmingham Curzon Street, sometime between 2036 and 2039. A project that once promised to shrink journey times between two of Britain's biggest cities could no longer promise a delivery decade. So where does the money actually go on a project like this? It's worth pausing on this, because it explains almost everything. Tunnels alone eat billions. HS2 required boring through dense populated ground in the Chilterns and beneath outer London, and every unexpected geological condition adds months and millions. Land acquisition across hundreds of properties added years of legal negotiation before a single shovel touched the ground, and two independent reviews, one led by former Crossrail chief James Stewart, found something more uncomfortable than bad luck. They found premature contract awards and constant scope changes. In plain terms, the project kept redesigning itself while it was already under construction. That single detail explains almost the entire cost story. You cannot build efficiently while you're still deciding what you are building. There's also a quieter driver behind the numbers, one that rarely makes headlines but shapes every mega project in the country at the same time. Labor and material costs don't rise in isolation. When HS2, nuclear plants and a wave of housing developments all compete for the same engineers, the same concrete and the same skilled contractors in the same years, prices climb regardless of how well any single project is managed. HS2 wasn't just fighting its own design problems, it was fighting a construction market. Then there's the human layer, the part that doesn't show up in a spreadsheet. Thousands of households along the route were bought out, relocated, or left waiting years to learn whether their homes would be demolished. Ancient woodlands were cleared. Small businesses near planned stations delayed investment for a decade, uncertain whether the promised passenger numbers would ever arrive. A project justified by economic growth spent years functioning for the people living along it as a source of pure uncertainty. Here's the part that stings the most, and it's the part that turns this from an engineering story into a trust story. HS2 wasn't sold to the public as a convenience, it was sold as transformation. Faster journeys, yes, but also new capacity on old lines, new jobs in the Midlands and the North, a signal that Britain could still build big. Every delay and every cut chips away at more than a schedule. It chips away at whether people believe their government can deliver anything at this scale again. That's the real cost of a failed mega project. Not just the overspend, but the erosion of confidence in every project that comes after it. And yet, HS2 isn't simply a story of failure with nothing to learn from. The lessons are already being written down, and they're strikingly consistent across almost every mega project that has ever gone over budget. Lock the engineering before you lock the price. Keep one authority clearly in charge, so no decision gets diluted across a dozen departments. And resist the political urge to announce a number before you've actually done the work of finding one. Consider the alternative approach some countries have taken. High-speed rail in Japan and parts of Europe was delivered close to budget because governance stayed centralized and scope stayed fixed once construction began. The difference wasn't better engineers, it was better discipline before the first tunnel was ever dug. Britain has been here before too. The Channel Tunnel, decades earlier, cost far more than projections, around 80% over its original budget, and for many of the same reasons. Fixed political deadlines, shifting engineering requirements, and financing structures built around a number nobody could guarantee. HS2 is not a one-off embarrassment. It's the same failure, repeating itself a generation later on a bigger scale. So, where does HS2 actually stand today? Construction is active. Viaducts are rising across the Midlands. Tunnel boring machines have completed major sections beneath the Chilterns. This is not an abandoned project, and it will very likely open one day, carrying passengers between London and Birmingham in a fraction of the current time. But it will do so, having cost roughly 3 times its original price, on a route half the length of what was promised, arriving years later than anyone was told. There's a quiet lesson in that gap between promise and delivery. and it applies far beyond railways. The most dangerous number in any large project isn't the one that turns out to be wrong. It's the one that gets locked in before anyone actually knows the answer. Once that number becomes public, it takes on a life of its own. Politicians defend it. The public expects it. And by the time the real cost surfaces, walking it back feels like failure, even when the original number was never realistic to begin with. That's really what HS2's story comes down to. Not one catastrophic mistake, but a slow accumulation of small ones, each individually defensible, together adding up to Britain's most expensive infrastructure reckoning in a generation. A railway that was supposed to prove a country could still build ambitiously, instead became the clearest evidence of how ambition without discipline quietly becomes waste. If this kind of story interests you, share it with someone who'd find it just as compelling, and consider subscribing for more.